Hi, I'm Tizana. My parents told me they hated everything about me, and then told me to leave. So I did. I packed my things, walked out the door, but left the rent, the lights, and the truth behind. They thought I'd disappear quietly. But what if I told you that the real story didn't end when I left? It started the moment they tried to erase me. What happens when the one they called a burden turns out to be the reason the house was still standing? Would you stay in a home that only loves you when you're useful? Let me tell you what really happened. It started like any other Thursday night. Velda insisting we all sit for dinner, like some Norman Rockwell painting, though the food came from takeout boxes, and the silence was heavy enough to flatten a room. The chicken was lukewarm. The rice had gone clumpy. I'd barely chewed my second bite when I noticed her watching me, fork resting on her plate, lips pressed together, like she was holding back something sour. You know, she began, smoothing her napkin like the words needed room to breathe. We've been talking, your sister and I. Avis didn't look up. She just kept scooping rice like she hadn't just been handed the mic. We think it's time for some changes, Velda continued. Your sister's stepping up more lately, helping out, taking initiative. My stomach clenched, not because I didn't know where this was going, but because I did. You've been drifting, Tizana. Working from home, all these freelance gigs. It's not sustainable. She smiled, the kind that never reached her eyes. Maybe it's time you consider other arrangements. The fork in my hand stalled mid-air. Other arrangements? Avis finally chimed in, still not meeting my eye. It's just that it's a lot. You've been here for a while, and honestly, you don't really seem happy either. Maybe it'd be good for everyone. Malcolm didn't say anything. Not then. Not ever, really. His silence always spoke just enough to keep his hands clean. The room went quiet again, the kind of stillness that lets you hear your pulse behind your ears. I pay the rent, I said quietly, not to start a fight, but to remind them, any of them, what was real. And the internet, water, gas, that's all me. Velda waved a hand like she was swatting a fly. We never asked you to. That stung more than I expected. Of course not, I said. You just assumed someone else would, like always. Her smile dropped. Her voice didn't rise, but the edge in it could have split glass. You've got an attitude, Tizana. Always have. You act like you're the only one who's ever sacrificed anything. I never asked for applause, but you sure act like we owe you something, she snapped. I pushed my plate away. I live here. I've kept this place afloat. You don't live here, Velda hissed. You squat here, like some bitter little ghost who blames everyone else for her own mediocrity. That's when it happened. The words. I hate everything about you, she said, clear, icy, unshaken. Just leave. And like that, the conversation was over. No yelling, no thrown dishes. Just 7 words that stripped 32 years of daughterhood clean from the bone. Avis kept eating. Malcolm pretended to check his watch. I stood there for a second, frozen between humiliation and something hotter, colder, meaner than sadness. I didn't say a word. Didn't throw mine back. That would have made it a scene, and scenes give them a reason to call you dramatic. So I pushed my chair in and walked upstairs. Every step echoed. I imagined they were listening, waiting for me to slam a door or cry out, but there was nothing to hear. I'd stopped crying for them a long time ago. Inside my room, I paused just long enough to close the door gently. My hands went straight to the bottom drawer of the dresser. I pulled out the red file folder, labeled with my initials. Inside were lease agreements, utility payment printouts, receipts. All in my name. All paid, logged, documented. I didn't look at them long. I knew what they were. Proof. Not of generosity, but of existence. The kind no one there had ever wanted to acknowledge. I sat on the edge of the bed, folder on my lap. The walls looked the same, bare, beige, impersonal. No photos, no cards. Not even a nail to hang a frame. That was never accidental. There's a different kind of pain when your presence feels like clutter in the place you fund. A deeper kind of betrayal, when people sleep under your roof, but still pretend they built it. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't beg. But inside, a sentence looped through my mind, over and over, like it had been waiting its whole life to be spoken. They told me to leave. They have no idea what that will cost them. I didn't move for a long while after I closed that drawer. The file still sat on my lap, but my eyes were somewhere else, caught between what had just happened and every time it almost did. Eventually, I slid the folder beneath my bed and stood, turning slowly toward the closet. I wasn't packing to leave just yet, but something in me needed to be ready. Not for them, to explain or defend myself, but for me, to finally stop holding on to the lie that staying had ever meant belonging. I grabbed the old duffel bag I used for weekend getaways I never took and laid it on the bed. The zipper stuck a little, hadn't been used in years. I pulled open the top drawer of my dresser to start with the basics. Socks, a few shirts, a cardigan that still smelled faintly like lavender from the last time I had peace. And there it was, tucked behind a faded bus pass and a cracked keychain from a forgotten beach trip, a folded piece of paper. My handwriting stared back at me in blue pen, crooked and small. "Happy birthday, Taz." I had written it to myself. I was 12. That year, I had pretended to be sick so I wouldn't have to go to school. Not because I felt ill, but because I didn't want to be the only girl in homeroom without a celebration, a balloon taped to her chair, or a name called over the intercom. I stayed home, curled on the couch, waiting for my mother to remember. Maybe she'd come in and ask what kind of cake I wanted. Maybe she'd call my name with a lit candle. She didn't. She walked past me 3 times that day. Never asked about the date, never looked twice. That night, she scolded me for not folding the laundry. When I first wrote that card, it was an act of hope. Now, it felt more like a case file, evidence from the first time I understood that love in my house came with conditions I'd never meet. I placed the card inside the duffel bag, not out of sentiment, but because even my pain deserved to be stored somewhere. The next drawer down held less innocence, dust-covered trophies, participation ribbons, old papers from school. I flipped through them until my fingers landed on a gold-trimmed certificate. It still looked pristine. My high school writing award. First place. Regional level. I had been 15. I remembered standing on that auditorium stage, the lights so hot they blurred the faces in the crowd. My teacher hugged me. My name echoed in the mic. My parents didn't show. Later that night, I laid the certificate on the kitchen table like an offering. I even folded a napkin beside it in case someone thought to celebrate. Velda walked by and gave it a glance. "Avis's calculus test was harder than that," she said. "We don't throw parties for every worksheet." I took it back to my room. Never framed it. Never mentioned it again. Now, as I held it in my hands, I wasn't angry. I was exhausted. Exhausted from trying to matter in a place that only knew how to measure worth by comparison. Avis always checked the boxes. Math awards, stable job, mild temperament. I was the jagged piece that didn't fit, no matter how long I stayed pressed into their mold. I folded the certificate gently and slid it behind the birthday card. Outside, the light had shifted. The house had that creaky silence it always got just after 9 p.m. When the dishes were done, the TV mumbled in the other room, and no one thought to knock before barging in. I sat back on the edge of the bed. My duffel was half full, though I hadn't packed anything important yet. Not the laptop I worked from, not the books I read to remember I existed outside this address. Just clothes, paper, and memory. And still, the room felt lighter than it had in years. I looked at the walls, still blank. Not a photo, not a pinned-up schedule, not even a nail. They'd stayed that way for a reason. You don't decorate a space you know can turn on you. I ran my hand along the nightstand, wiping away a thin layer of dust. I had nothing here with my name on it. Not on the mailbox, not on the family portraits, not even in the way they said grace at dinner. Bless this house, bless our daughters. Daughters, plural. I guess that made me invisible by default. But tonight, packing quietly in my own room, after being told to leave a house I paid for, I wasn't invisible. I was done. I zipped the bag halfway and sat back down, letting the worn handle slip through my fingers. Somewhere downstairs, a spoon clinked against a bowl. Probably Malcolm eating cereal like nothing had happened. I stayed still, eyes on the ceiling, heart somewhere between relief and the sting that always came after being too quiet for too long. My mind drifted, uninvited, back to when I was 19 and thought I was doing something right. It was a Saturday. I just closed up Cafe Indigo, still wearing the apron with coffee stains on the hem. I remember walking the 6 blocks home, backpack slung over one shoulder, my shoes soaked from someone's dropped iced mocha, and my wrists aching from lifting too many trays. All I wanted was a sandwich in 10 minutes, without anyone asking me for anything. I stepped inside and immediately saw them. 3 empty plates on the counter, the TV flashing muted reruns, and Velda at the sink, scrubbing a pan that didn't look dirty. She turned just enough to notice me. "It's midnight. What decent girl comes home this late?" I dropped my keys in the dish by the door. "We had a rush. Closing took longer." "Or maybe you were off with some boy?" She said it flat, like it wasn't even a question. "We didn't raise you to hang around cafes and flirt for tips." I blinked. The words hit in that specific cold way only family could manage, straight through the chest, but without enough force to stop you from standing. I didn't bother explaining that I'd stayed late to help a coworker cover their shift, or that I needed the hours to cover the gas bill that showed up with my name on it every month. Malcolm glanced at me from the couch and turned back to the game. Avis looked up from her phone long enough to smirk, then back down like she'd seen enough. I went to bed hungry that night, not because there wasn't food in the house, but because I couldn't swallow the way they spoke to me. 2 months after that, the envelope came. White, crisp, with a gold-embossed return address. University of Oregon, Creative Writing Department. I got in. Partial scholarship, a real shot. I opened it in my room, read it twice. My hands shook so badly, I had to sit down on the floor just to breathe right. When I finally showed it to Velda, she scanned the page like it was a receipt for something she hadn't ordered. "And who's going to get your father to his checkups? Who's covering the cable bill while you're chasing poems?" she asked, waving the paper. Avis chimed in from the hallway. "If anyone should get out of here first, it's me. But I stay. For them." That word, them. Like I was something outside of the unit, a visitor, a detour. I folded the letter without another word and tucked it inside the same drawer as my old certificate. It joined the growing pile of almosts, nearlies, and not quite yets I'd been collecting since I was 12. Back in the present, I found that envelope again while packing, still smooth, still unread beyond that first night. I didn't cry this time either. I placed it beside my books, not because I hoped to use it now, but because it was part of my history. Not the proud kind, but the kind you keep to remind yourself of who you were before they edited the story. The room was nearly packed by now. I sat on the bed again, shoes off, lights dimmed. The air was warm and still. I could hear Velda on the phone downstairs, her voice slicing through the quiet like it always did. She was probably telling someone how exhausting it was to deal with me. "You know how Tazana is," I imagined her saying. "She takes and never thinks about what we've done for her." What they'd done was make sure I never felt safe enough to plan too far ahead. I ran my hand over the top of my duffel, brushing away lint that didn't matter. Not now, not anymore. Being needed had cost me a version of myself I was just starting to reclaim. I didn't leave that house because of one fight, one insult, one dinner. I left because, for years, I had been everything they required, and still, somehow, not enough. By sunrise, the silence in the house felt heavier than usual. Not the kind that comes with peace, but the kind that follows a decision no one wants to say out loud. I'd packed most of my things the night before, though I left the duffel zipped shut and tucked it under the bed. Leaving, I realized, wasn't just about walking out. It was about being done explaining why I stayed. I heard Velda's voice coming from the kitchen just past 8 a.m. as I stepped into the hallway. She wasn't trying to whisper. "She just sits around and types all day," she said flatly. "Doesn't cook, doesn't clean. What exactly is she contributing anymore?" Avis answered, like she was agreeing with the weather. "I've been thinking the same. Maybe I should start handling more of the bills. At least someone responsible will be involved." I stood there for a second. Then I turned, walked into the kitchen, and without a word, opened the drawer next to the sink. 3 thick envelopes, each stamped and dated, came out clean. I placed them on the table between Velda's mug and the half-eaten banana she always forgot about. "Electricity, gas, internet," I said quietly. "All in my name, all paid, every single month." Velda didn't touch her coffee. Avis raised her eyebrows, but said nothing. "I'm not sitting around. I've been working from home and covering what no one else even notices." I didn't raise my voice, but the edge in it wasn't dulled. Avis let out a short, awkward laugh. "We just assumed Dad handled that." Malcolm, standing by the toaster, pretended not to hear a word. I turned and walked back to my room. I didn't slam the door. There was no need. By late afternoon, I was scanning documents, everything from rent transfers to receipts for roof repairs I'd quietly covered last spring after the leak. I'd spent hours on hold with contractors, paid in full, and never once asked for reimbursement or credit. That was the point, wasn't it? Being quiet, being useful, being forgettable. I opened the same drawer that held the envelope from Oregon, slid everything else beside it, and then pulled out a small flash drive from my desk, labeled it contingency. If they wanted to keep pretending I was the burden, they'd have to do it without the paper trail saying otherwise. I didn't confront Velda or Avis after that morning. Instead, I watched them move through the house like I'd vanished, like my voice at breakfast hadn't echoed down the walls. The day passed in that weird, stagnant way some days do. Not fast, not slow, just waiting. And then, later that evening, as I passed the fridge to grab a glass of water, Velda looked up from her crossword and asked without blinking, "Could you grab groceries tomorrow? Milk, eggs, that gluten-free cereal your sister likes." I nodded. I didn't argue, but I didn't forget. That night, I opened a new spreadsheet and began itemizing. Gas, internet, water, house repairs. I cross-checked each with bank records, printed proof, scanned every receipt. I wasn't going to let them rewrite history again. My room became more than just a place to sleep. It turned into my archive. Every forgotten expense, every silent thank you that was never said, every ounce of labor they attributed to someone else. I cataloged it all. And still, it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like truth. Finally written in ink instead of swallowed whole. Of course, that wasn't the first time I'd been erased. Last year, when Velda had surgery, just a routine outpatient procedure, I was the one who drove her to the hospital at 6 a.m. I waited alone in the hallway for 5 hours, picked up her prescriptions, made sure she had soup in the pantry, helped her upstairs without once being asked. 3 weeks later, a hospital satisfaction survey arrived in the mail. It was addressed to Avis. When I mentioned it, Velda shrugged. "You were just there because Avis had to work. She's the one who takes care of things." I didn't say anything then, but I started saving receipts after that. All of them. That wasn't about money. It was about memory, about having a record when they eventually tried to make me disappear again. Back in the present, I sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop open, folders sorted into piles around me. The weight of what I carried wasn't just financial. It was the weight of being the quiet one, the one who filled in gaps without leaving fingerprints, the one who held up a house that called her a guest. If they wanted to keep calling me selfish, dramatic, too much, not enough, they'd have to do it while staring at a spreadsheet that told a different story. I leaned back, stretched my spine, and looked toward the door. "I don't need a fight," I said aloud to the quiet, "but I'm not walking away empty-handed either." Dinner started off quieter than usual. Not awkward silent, just rehearsed. Velda set out her mismatched dishes like we were hosting royalty, not Marlene and Chuck from next door. They were the kind of neighbors who always waved too hard and asked too many questions, but Velda liked them. They validated her stories. I took my usual seat at the far end of the table, not quite close enough to be part of the conversation, but close enough to be observed. The small talk floated around like warm air from the oven. Weather, traffic, how Chuck's cousin's dog had some surgery in Reno. I nodded when appropriate, smiled once. Then came the question. "So, Tazana," Marlene chirped, "what is it you do these days? Velda said you work from home?" My fork paused mid-air. I opened my mouth to answer, but Avis beat me to it. "She works online," she said with a chuckle. "Not sure if that's code for nap-time entrepreneur or part-time Pinterest consultant." The table laughed, nervously at first, then for real. Chuck nearly choked on his roll. Velda didn't stop her, didn't even glance my way. And Malcolm? He kept buttering his bread like he was spreading silence itself. I swallowed the heat that rose to my chest. My eyes found Avis. She looked proud of herself, basking in the moment. I stood up slowly. "Excuse me," I said, barely above a whisper. No one asked where I was going. Upstairs, I went to the drawer beneath my bed, the one that held more truth than this entire house combined. I pulled out the envelope I'd prepared days ago, just in case. Cream-colored, sealed, deliberate. I came back down just as Velda was finishing her story about how Avis once saved the Thanksgiving turkey with a shoelace and an old meat thermometer. I placed the envelope in front of Avis. Not hard, not theatrical. Just enough for it to be undeniable. "What's this?" she asked, half laughing. I sat back down. "Receipts," I said simply, "since I apparently just sit around all day." She opened it. Eyes scanned the first page, then the second. Then her fingers froze on the third. Rent checks, utility bills, repairs, dates, amounts, all of it highlighted, documented. Velda reached across the table to pull a page closer. Her smile had dropped so far, it might have fallen off her face entirely. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "You don't have to," I replied, "but you might want to keep reading." Avis flipped one more page, then scoffed. "This proves nothing." "It proves everything," I said, locking eyes with her. "If I ever walk out, so does the lease. So do the lights, the heat, the roof that didn't leak this winter." Chuck cleared his throat. Marlene blinked like she'd walked into a movie halfway through. Velda's voice cracked the silence. "You didn't need to do all that, Tazana." "No," I said. "I needed to survive." For the rest of dinner, no one picked up their forks. Later that night, back in my room, I added a new label to my file folder. Delivered. The envelope wasn't a warning. It was a beginning. I opened my laptop and updated my list. Not out of spite, not even out of pride. Just clarity. Item after item, cost after cost. It wasn't about money. It never had been. It was about presence, proof, making sure I couldn't be erased again. As I typed, the sound of laughter downstairs drifted upward. It was forced now, clipped. The kind that fills space when people don't know what else to say. I didn't go down to say goodnight. I didn't have to. Some things, once opened, don't fit back in their envelope. By morning, the tension from the night before had settled into the floorboards. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the kind of stillness that hinted someone had decided they were owed a war, but wanted it to look like an accident. I left for coffee around 9 a.m., walked the 4 blocks to the corner cafe. No headphones, no phone. Just needed space that didn't have my name whispered in it. The line was short. I ordered black, no sugar. Something sharp to cut through whatever was stuck in my chest. I sat by the window and drank half of it too quickly. Burned my tongue a little. It made me feel real. By the time I got back to the house, it was nearing 10. The sun had shifted just enough to make the hallway feel different, longer somehow. I paused at my bedroom door. It was cracked open. I hadn't left it that way. I pushed it open with the edge of my foot. From a glance, nothing looked out of place. But then I saw the folder on my desk. One corner peeled up. The contents weren't as neatly stacked as I'd left them. One envelope was partially torn, like someone had started to open it but thought better halfway through. My laptop's power cord had been yanked from the wall. It dangled off the side of the desk, just above the floor. I walked in slowly, set the coffee down on the windowsill, checked my drawers. The second one had been rifled through. My receipts were slightly bent at the edges. Two files that had been labeled and sorted now sat flipped and exposed, like someone had gone looking for the wrong thing and left everything else broken in the process. Nothing was missing, but everything felt taken. I stood there, hands still, letting the violation bloom without panic. No yelling, no shaking fists, just a cold understanding. My space had become their hunting ground. I didn't slam anything. I didn't even close the door right away. I just gathered the disheveled documents, restacked them neatly, and sat at my desk in silence. It was almost noon when I walked downstairs. Velda was at the stove, pretending to stir something that didn't need stirring. Avis was scrolling through her phone on the couch, legs tucked under her like a teenager who never had to grow up. Neither looked at me. I placed an envelope on the kitchen counter. This one was empty. On top, a yellow sticky note in my handwriting. Break into my space again, and this one won't be. No names, no accusation, just fact. I didn't wait for them to respond. I walked back upstairs, each step measured, not rushed, not casual. Just enough to make sure they knew I'd seen what I'd seen. By evening, I'd changed every password. Cloud access, disabled, local backups, removed, the shared Wi-Fi. I left it untouched for now, but scheduled it for cancellation with the rest. 2 weeks. That's how long they had before everything with my name on it disappeared with me. I encrypted my hard drive, stored everything critical onto an external unit labeled Backup Year May. No one would know what it was unless they were looking, and by the time they looked, I'd be gone. I wasn't planning revenge. I was removing permission. By midnight, I'd emailed the landlord, requested lease termination paperwork, and asked that future correspondence be sent directly to me, not the household. I didn't explain why. They'd figure it out soon enough. I laid in bed that night, fully clothed, eyes on the ceiling fan spinning slowly in the dark. No music, no TV, just the sound of a house breathing the same air it always had, thick with entitlement and too many things left unsaid. This wasn't fear. It wasn't defeat. It was calculation. You can't live with people who treat your boundaries like personal insults. You can't protect your space when the people closest to you think privacy is a challenge to be conquered. So you plan. You prepare. You disappear. Not because you're weak, but because you've decided they don't deserve access anymore. They hadn't knocked on my door all day. And I was glad. The first sign was the flickering kitchen light. Then came the silence when Velda tried the toaster and got nothing but a click. By the time she pressed the microwave buttons in frustration, I could hear her muttering all the way upstairs. I stayed seated at my desk, not even pretending to be surprised. I'd submitted the cancellation notices 3 days ago. Utilities, Wi-Fi, lease. All in a nice, tidy stack with end dates marked and finalized. They'd kept calling me a ghost. Fine. I'd vanish, one switch at a time. Downstairs, Velda's heels clacked hard against the tile as she moved from appliance to appliance. Malcolm was probably still in his recliner, acting as though someone else should solve whatever went wrong. "Why is nothing working?" she snapped. Avis chimed in from the living room. "My phone won't connect to the Wi-Fi. Is it down or what?" No one called my name. That part stung more than I'd admit. I expected blame. What I got was indifference disguised as confusion. A few minutes later, the mail dropped through the slot. I heard Velda curse under her breath, soft, controlled. the way she did when she wanted to look composed but couldn't. I imagined her peeling open the envelope from the landlord, reading the words, pending termination, and turning pale beneath her makeup. "She thinks we won't survive without her?" she muttered, not realizing I could hear every word. "Watch us." That afternoon, it got worse. I was sitting on my floor, sorting through receipts again, when my phone buzzed. A Facebook notification, then another, and another. Velda had posted. It wasn't specific. She was too careful for that. It read, "Some daughters forget where they came from. Some forget who stayed up late to sew Halloween costumes, who worked double shifts to buy school shoes. We gave her everything, and now she leaves us in the dark." Literally. The picture was of our dark kitchen. She'd staged it. A candle lit on the counter. 2 mugs in the frame. It looked heartfelt, pitiful, crafted to harvest sympathy. And it worked. Comments flooded in. "No child should treat their parents that way. Breaks my heart to see how kids are these days. You deserve better. God sees you." Then Avis shared it with her own caption. "We don't deserve this. But maybe that's the lesson." The likes piled up. Not once did they name me. They didn't have to. People who knew us, neighbors, cousins, old church friends, knew exactly who they meant. And it gave everyone permission to judge me based on a single photo and a paragraph dripping in martyrdom. I didn't comment. I didn't message Velda or Avis. Instead, I took a deep breath and went for a walk, just around the block. I let the evening settle into my bones while I thought through every possible reaction. I let myself imagine slamming my phone into the sidewalk, crying on a friend's shoulder, screaming into a pillow. And then I came home, made a cup of tea, and opened my laptop. I created a new folder called Public. Inside it, I placed screenshots of all my payments, emails from the landlord confirming rent paid under my name, voice memos, recordings, not of arguments, but of logistics. Velda telling me to pay the water bill before they shut it off again. Avis asking if I could spot her for groceries just this once. Malcolm reminding me that the girls handled things now. There was even a short clip, one I'd forgotten I had, of Velda's voice from a week ago, sharp and distinct. "You think because you pay a few bills, you run this place? Get over yourself." I edited none of it. I didn't add commentary. I didn't twist anything. I just titled the page, Context, and posted the link quietly, beneath Velda's photo. No hashtags, no emojis, no capital letters screaming for attention. Just this caption, "You asked me to leave. I left. Here's why." Then I closed the laptop and let it sit. I wasn't looking for applause. I wasn't asking to be understood. I just wanted them to know the version of me they were trying to sell to the world wasn't going to sit in silence anymore. I didn't have to scream. The truth didn't need volume. It just needed to be seen. I didn't refresh the page. I didn't watch the likes crawl in or the shares multiply. I didn't even turn the volume up on the audio clip I posted. Velda's voice was already carved into memory. Instead, I made tea. The microwave still blinked 12 foul since I'd unplugged it the day before. I poured water over the bag and let it steep, watching the amber swirl darken in the mug. The glow from my laptop screen filled the apartment behind me. By morning, I'd left the kettle on the stove, untouched. My phone buzzed so many times it rattled across the counter. I turned it over. The link had taken on a life of its own. The messages started around 6. A friend from college I hadn't spoken to in years wrote, "Is this really you? I'm sorry you went through all that." A former coworker from the cafe texted, "Just saw your post. You were always the quiet one. Guess they mistook silence for surrender." Then came the email from the landlord. Straightforward and brief. He had read the post. He understood now. He was formally transitioning all documentation to reflect the rightful tenant and offered to serve the eviction himself if necessary. That sentence alone was a full exhale. At the Hartwell house, things were falling apart, but not from my hand. Just gravity finally catching up to the weight they refused to carry. Velda woke up to over 200 missed notifications. Her profile, which once hosted church group invites and passive-aggressive recipe shares, was now overrun with comments she couldn't control. So, she paid everything? Are you serious right now? You kicked your daughter out and played victim? Ma'am, this is embarrassing. Avis deleted her repost within the hour. Malcolm logged off entirely, though he rarely engaged with anything online to begin with. Later that day, I heard from a cousin on my dad's side. I always knew something was off. Aunt Velda's version never added up. I didn't respond to any of them. That wasn't the point. I wasn't there to argue. The point was clarity, not vindication, not revenge, just truth in a room where it had been silenced for too long. The audio clip, just 12 seconds, was undeniable. Velda's voice, sharp and steady. I hate everything about you. Leave. No filter, no edits, just her own words, raw and permanent. She tried to post a rebuttal, a long-winded paragraph about the dangers of online storytelling and not believing everything you hear, but it got buried before anyone noticed. It didn't matter. The internet had already done what I couldn't, held up a mirror. That night, I left the apartment and walked to the corner bodega for a sandwich. On my way back, a stranger passed me and nodded. Nothing dramatic. Just that slow, familiar recognition of someone who'd seen something and silently said, I get it. I slept well for the first time in weeks. A few days later, I was invited to speak on a podcast about adult estrangement and family trauma. I hesitated at first. I didn't want to become someone else's cautionary tale. But then, I thought about all the women like me, women who stayed too long, said too little, paid too much, and left with nothing but bruises no one could see. So I went. The studio was tucked behind a bookshop, warm, worn in, full of the scent of paper and coffee. The host greeted me with a hug and a tea I didn't ask for, but she got it right. Earl Grey with a splash of almond milk. We didn't start recording right away. She let me settle in. When we did begin, she asked gently, Why didn't you fight harder to be loved? I didn't pause. Because some fights aren't worth the bruise, I said. And some people only love you in the shape they need you to be. I stepped outside that shape. They didn't follow. She nodded. Quiet. No rush to fill the silence. I told my story, not to rewrite the past, but to remind myself that I was never crazy for feeling unwanted. I was never selfish for needing peace. This isn't about revenge, I said near the end. It's about record-keeping, about making sure I don't have to explain myself ever again to people who decided who I was before I had the chance to. I didn't cry. Neither did she. When we finished, she thanked me and said, Your voice doesn't shake. That's rare. I had to shake for years, I told her. Now it's their turn. When I stepped out of the podcast studio, the sky had already turned that late evening shade of gray-blue, soft enough to make the city look kinder than it really was. The streets were calm. No one recognized me. I liked it that way. 2 weeks passed. I didn't post again. I didn't need to. One morning, as I was slicing apples for breakfast, an email arrived from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, Curious question. Inside was just one line. Is this the daughter you were ashamed of? No name, no context, no follow-up. I didn't reply, but I didn't delete it either. I filed it in a folder I now labeled Affirmation. Next to screenshots, thank you messages, and one line I'd copied from a comment. Your silence was strength. They mistook it for guilt. Meanwhile, the house I once paid for had gone quiet in ways I'd never imagined. Velda and Avis packed their lives into cardboard boxes without help. There was no shouting this time, just tape ripping and things being wrapped in old towels. They'd sold the house quickly, below market, probably out of pressure, or shame, or both. Malcolm moved into a co-op for seniors, quietly disappearing into a place where no one asked what he used to ignore. The neighbors didn't gossip aloud, but they kept their distance. A few women from the church unfriended Velda. The community didn't cancel her, but it stopped offering her an audience. No one mentioned my name. But when they looked toward the house, I saw it on their faces. Back in my apartment, life had shifted into something steadier. My basil plant grew faster than I expected. I spent mornings tending to herbs on my tiny balcony, sipping tea with the kind of peace you don't fully appreciate until you've lived without it. One afternoon, I opened an email from my Aunt Marla, my mother's older sister. We hadn't spoken in almost a decade. The message read, "I saw what happened. I know this family. And I'm proud of how you carried yourself. That took more grace than I ever had." I didn't respond, but I printed it, pinned it behind a cupboard door, out of sight. No need for frames or wall space. Just quiet validation, tucked where I'd see it when I needed it. I never made a big speech, never told the internet I'd been healed. Some days, I still felt like a splinter stuck in my own skin. But I no longer apologized for taking up space. Saturday mornings were my favorite now. I started volunteering at the Midtown Community Center, teaching digital literacy to older women, some widowed, some divorced, all looking for a way to FaceTime their kids or pay bills without relying on anyone. That week, I sat beside a woman named Linda. Her hands trembled as she tried to join her son's video call. When the screen flickered to life and his face appeared, she froze, eyes wide with disbelief. "You're really there," she whispered to the screen. After the call, she turned to me, tears caught in the corners of her smile. "I haven't seen him in 4 years," she said. "He lives in Michigan now, got married. I didn't even know he shaved his beard." I nodded, squeezing her shoulder. "I know how it feels to be erased. Let's make sure you're seen." She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes was enough. Later, as I cleaned up the chairs and packed away the tablets, I thought about all the roles I used to chase. Good daughter, quiet one, the fixer. None of them fit me anymore. I didn't need a label now, just space, and quiet, and the knowledge that I'd made it through the fire without needing to burn anything down in return. My family didn't call. I didn't wait. Some silences are less about absence and more about peace. Before we wrap up, I want to speak directly to you. Yes, you, the one who stayed with me through every quiet battle, every page of this story. If there's one truth I've learned, it's this. Silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's protection. And sometimes it's survival. There's a difference between being quiet and being invisible. For years, I thought I had to choose between speaking up and keeping peace. But peace that costs you your voice is just a prettier kind of prison. Walking away wasn't about giving up on my family. It was about choosing not to give up on myself. And maybe, if you've ever been told you're too much or not enough, if you've ever had to gather the strength to leave what no longer sees you, then you already understand. So let me ask you this. Have you ever stayed too long somewhere that stopped feeling like home? Do you think loyalty should have limits? And if you've ever walked away quietly, how did you find the courage? I'd love to hear your story. Drop it in the comments, even if it's just a word or an emoji. And if this story spoke to you, if it stirred something inside your heart, leave a comment with a 1, or let me know what city you're watching from. If you didn't connect with the story, I want to hear that too. Tell me what missed and where you're tuning in from. This space is for real conversations, and I read every word. If you'd like to hear more true, human stories that speak to the heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter. Your story matters, and someone out there needs to hear it. Maybe not today, but one day, just like you needed to hear mine. Until next time, be seen, be safe, and never apologize for the space you take up.